Welcome to my leather shop. My name is George Hurst. This program is about saddle stitching, or hand stitching as it's sometimes called. This method of stitching, although time-consuming, is the strongest and best way to stitch leather. I have here on the table in front of me an assortment of items that we'll use to do hand stitching or saddle stitching, whatever you want to call it. One, of course, is on my right and your left is the harness needles. These are, of course, very necessary. The next two items here are stitching groovers. These will be used to groove a channel in the leather so that the thread can lay in the channel and keep it from wearing. The next items here are thonging chisels that we can use for thinner leather for stitching. Of course, a wing divider is very important to do our guidelines. And of course, we need to have a stitching awl. There are several available, and we'll talk about them later. And of course, we need stitching thread. Both of these are my favorites. They're waxed linen thread. For this first segment, we are going to do some thinner leather. I've got two pieces of 4 to 5 ounce that I have glued together here. And we're going to use the thonging chisels, the waxed linen thread, the smaller and less expensive the stitching groover, and of course the 2 harness needles. Before you punch holes of any kind, you should make sure that your tool is nice and sharp and polished on both sides. To do that, especially if it's a new one, take a piece of 600 grit wet dry paper that's been glued to a block of wood, and you can strop this until it gets nice and smooth. Get any rough edges off of there. And then you will do that also with all of your punches, no matter what they are. They should be polished and shiny. Now I'll take the side of the board that has the jeweler's rouge on it, and I'll polish some more. This will make it much easier for you to punch and to remove your punch from the leather after you go through it. Please note that I have here some beeswax. This is very, very helpful when you're doing your punching. And I've also got a polyester punching board. I prefer this over the rubber because it gives me a much cleaner hole on the back side. First thing I should tell you is that it's always a good idea to punch a corner hole first. Notice how easy the punch came out? This is because it's nice and shiny, and I'm using some beeswax on it. Now we can start punching from one end, and notice that the punch comes out of the leather very nicely. I'm staying in my groove. After several punches, you'll want to get some more beeswax and continue punching down to the other end. As we get near the end, we may have to do a little planning. In this case, it's going to come out pretty good. What you would do is you would either stretch out 4 or 5 punches or squeeze a few of them to make it come out relatively even. Now we can go around the corner and start down the other side. Now, I want to tell you that when I did my grooving, I grooved both the top and the bottom. As you see here on the bottom, my holes came straight through and they're in the groove on the bottom side. Now I would like to show you a good way to load your needle. Before we do that, we might tell you that always people ask, how much thread do you use? Well, I should say use no more than 2 yards at a time, because you can splice it and it'll be less wear and tear on the thread if you don't use such a long thread, and it will also be a lot faster for you. Now to lower your needle, kind of flatten your thread with your fingers and go through the eye. Once you're through the eye, bring it down to where you have about 1.5 inches of thread here. Now I'm going to twist the thread so that the fibers come apart, and then we'll pass the needle through the thread, as you can see here, and then we will pull it up like this. Now, if there's plenty of wax on your thread, you can just twist it and kind of pull it down like this, and your needle is ready to go. I will begin stitching right here. Now, the first thing I need to do is go through from front to back and then even up my threads. We've got a needle on each end here, and now we will go through the next hole. And now I'll go back through that same hole in the other direction. Now I can pull tight. Now once we get our routine going, we'll go through, come from back to front, and pull. The way you get a good looking stitch is to do the same thing all of the time. By that I mean, if you go through front to back each time, and then pull this one up, bring the next one in from back to front. Sometimes it's difficult to find that hole. And as long as you keep doing the same thing every time, you should have no difficulty making a good, strong, well-looking stitch. To do a splice is quite simple. After we've run out of thread, we just take this thread like this and just tie an overhand knot. The only reason for that is to get it out of the way. And I will come back 1, 2 stitches, go through that hole with my new thread, pull it up even, go through the next hole from front to back. Now come from back to front, pull it up snug, go through the next hole, come from back to front, go through the next hole. We're now past the end of our other thread, so we can take this apart, undo our knot, and with a sharp stencil knife, kind of pull it and cut down in the hole, and you'll never see it. Do that front and back. Now, we can just continue stitching as normal. As we get back to the end, we have gone through the last open hole now, and we have a choice. Now we can continue on down several stitches, or we could back stitch several stitches. I prefer to go down several stitches. As you see me doing here. Then, after you go past about 3 stitches, we can go take both of them to the back and cut them off with our stencil knife. Now we're all ready to finish our edges. For this next segment, we're going to do 2 pieces of heavy 8 to 9 ounce leather. So we're going to use a little different array of tools. Here we've got a better quality stitching groover. We've got an overstitch wheel. Here's a single, and here's one that's adaptable to different sizes. And we'll use a very good quality stitching awl. To make it easy to stab your holes for stitching with an awl, we want to make sure that it's nice and smooth, bright and shiny on all 4 sides. The best way to do that is take your block where you have the wet dry paper and do all of the edges, get them nice and smooth as you see me here. And after we get done with the wet dry paper, we can turn it over and use our strop that has jeweler's rouge on it and make sure we get everything nice and shiny so that it will go through the leather with ease. We will start grooving our edges now for our stitches, and we'll do just like we did before. We'll come right near the corner, stop just before we get there, hold this piece and cut it off. Now we will continue our stitching groove just as before. We're also grooving the back. Next, I will use my overstitch wheel, and I'll start by getting a good bite in the corner, and then I will just run down my groove as you see me here making the marks. Now, I did dampen this a little bit so that the marks would show up a little better. And as you get down here, the last couple holes, you may need to adjust them. And now we'll start in the other corner and go this way, staying right in the groove. To begin stabbing my holes, I have stropped my awl blade very well and polished it. And I'm using a little beeswax on the tip to make it easier to go through. Now, I'm going to start here at one of my marks, and I'm going to turn this blade so that it's at a 45-degree angle. Now, I want to also make sure that I go through and hit my groove on the other side. That's pretty important. Make sure each one is at a 45-degree angle so that when your thread pulls, it'll pull against a flat side as opposed to pulling where there's a point or a break. Please notice how the holes are at a 45-degree angle. Also note that I have my leathered almost into the jaws of my stitching pony. After we have finished our stitching, we can use our overstitch wheel again, now this time to go over top of the stitches and make them down into the groove nice and evenly. Well, that's about all there is to saddle stitching or hand stitching, whichever you want to call it. I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. My name is George Hurst, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the future on more videos from the Tandy Leather Factory.